DNFs, big penalties, and a couple of race incidents. This week I'm chatting all about the Dutch Grand Prix, so get ready because you've been summoned to the steward's office. Hello everyone and welcome back to the steward's office. I'm Sarah and this week F1 headed out to Zandvoort for the Dutch Grand Prix because F1 is back from summer break. We are into the second half of the season now. It's kind of the home stretch. Now that Zandvoort's done, we've only got 9 races left on the calendar, and I feel like this season's just gone incredibly quickly. I've not seen the races go by. But yeah, we're 15 races down now. And let's be honest, all right? Everyone came back with a little bit of a bang in Zandvoort. They made sure we knew that racing was back on, and we've got a fair bit to talk about. Now, in all honesty, right, this is probably one of the quietest summer breaks I've had since I began watching F1. I don't think any breaking news over the F1 summer break. There was no announcements about seats or anything. Not until like a day or two before race week started. But in general, for the majority of summer break, there were no big announcements or anything like that, which felt really strange. I think we've all just come to be prepared for the fact that there will be a breaking news graphic at some point during summer break and winter break, but it didn't happen. However, we did get some big news just before the race week started, like I said, and that was the fact that Cadillac have finally announced their drivers. And it wasn't a big surprise. So they've gone for a lineup of Checo Perez and Valtteri Bottas for the 2026 season. And there were a lot of rumours about this being the case. We'd heard a lot about Checo being in the running for the seat, Valtteri being in the running for the seat. So when it was actually announced, nobody was that surprised. And barring just the rumours, it doesn't surprise me that they've gone for 2 really experienced drivers. I think for a little while, a lot of us were thinking they might go for one experienced driver and then a rookie. But because Cadillac are a brand new outfit coming into Formula One and they don't have a lot of experience themselves, they're going to want drivers who really, really understand how a car should work, know how to drive on different circuits, they know those circuits well, and can give really good feedback to the teams. And for that, you need drivers who have a lot of Grand Prix experience under their belt. So I think it was a good idea for them to do that. It's great to see Checo and Valtteri back on the grid again. For Valtteri, his last team was with Sauber, and then for Checo, obviously, it was with Red Bull. So it's nice that they're getting another chance back on the grid. For Valtteri, I mean, he's still involved in Formula One. He's the reserve driver for Mercedes at the moment. So he's going to have done simulator work and testing work for them and kept his skills up to scratch. For Checo, as far as I know, he has not been affiliated with any F1 team in this year off that we've had. So for him, I think might take a little bit of settling into a team, but I don't think it's going to take him that long to get used to an F1 car again. I can't lie, right, guys? I'm just very curious. Beyond just how Cadillac do as a team, it's going to be interesting to see what a brand new team is like on the grid. But I am so curious as to the teammate dynamics between Valtteri and Checo. You just can't really see them interacting in my head. And you could tell that from the announcements that they both gave separately. Checo had this lovely video on social media saying that he was coming back, and it was really nice to see, and very typical Checo Perez. And then for Valtteri, there was just this image of him in a suit and on a surfboard, and it was also very, very Valtteri Bottas. So they are 2 very different personalities. I mean, like opposite ends of the spectrum. So I'm just really curious to see their interactions over 2026 and potentially beyond, because I don't think we actually know how long these contracts are lasting for. But yes, we now know who the Cadillac drivers are for 2026. Let's get into what has actually been going on during this race weekend, though, because there was a lot, let's be honest. Zandvoort is normally a racetrack where we don't get a lot of overtakes in, so qualifying is always super important, and because of that, I don't tend to expect too much come race day. The entire weekend was messy, though. It was a lot that went on. So let's dive into some of the qualifying highlights though. And for Lance Stroll, this was a tough weekend. He had already crashed in FP2 on the Friday, and Aston Martin and his mechanics ended up breaking curfew to put that car back together to get it ready for qualifying in FP3 the next day. Now, the crash that he had in FP2, thankfully he was okay. A lot of people were concerned that he was going to hurt his wrists again, having just had surgery on them earlier in the year. Thankfully, that was fine. The car, not so much. And look, he got into qualifying, and on his first fast lap, he ended up crashing again. Not great for Aston Martin. Obviously, the cost of putting new parts onto the car, not great for the mechanics who would have been working through the night anyway to get that car fixed, and then to not see it even qualify, like he didn't set a time at all, is gutting. And then obviously gutting for Lance Stroll to be starting in P20 for the race. In better news though, Yuki Tsunoda managed to make it out of Q1. He got into Q2, didn't get out of Q2, but we'll take that. Hopefully it's signs of improvement for him. On the flip side, Kimi Antonelli had another no-show in Q3. He exited in Q2. Carlos Sainz though, see, we're just going back and forth with the good and bad news at the moment. I swear I didn't do this on purpose, but for Carlos Sainz, he found some really good form during qualifying, and he's a driver that has really just struggled with the Williams car this year and is just getting used to it. I don't think it's anything beyond that, but qualifying has also been a bit of a struggle. It's not always been great for him, but he managed to get into Q3 and his teammate didn't. His teammate, I think, exited in Q2. I think he qualified P15. Yep, he did. And Alex was not impressed with tyre prep and all the rest of it, but for Carlos Sainz it really worked out for him and got into the top 10. Ferrari, they had a bit of a rocky qualifying and both cars did get into Q3. Not a lot of us had hope that was going to happen given practices and Q1, because practice looked like they had no pace most of the sessions. Q1, they looked like they were really struggling to find good pace, but it seemed to get better in Q2 and Q3, and like I said, both in the top 10. They were not able to challenge for pole, but I don't think anyone was going to be able to, because McLaren just looked so dominant on this track, more so than they have on a couple of the other circuits on the calendar. I feel like I sound really croaky today, and I'm so sorry. I've got this weird niggling cough at the moment that is really annoying me, so I'm sorry if I do sound a bit croaky. We did get Oscar Piastri on pole position, Lando Norris in P2, and then Max Verstappen at his home race was in P3. And like I said, it wasn't a surprise that pole went to McLaren, but I think a lot of people were kind of surprised that it was Oscar Piastri and not Lando Norris in P1. And that's just because Lando has seemed from FP1 up until Q3, he seemed to be the one that got the most out of the car in Zandvoort. And not by a lot, I'm talking like 100th of a second. But he was the one that was topping timesheets and was a little bit stronger than Oscar Piastri. But when it came to crunch time, Oscar just managed to pull out the time he really needed to stick pole position. The absolute highlight though of qualifying had to go to Isaac Hadjar, who managed to get his V-carb into P4. I can't tell you what happened, but it was incredible to see him qualify right behind Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. He did an amazing job. But let's dive into what went on during the race. Kicking off with our championship leaders, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, because even Max Verstappen has said at this point he's not really fighting for a championship. Now, for both of those two McLaren drivers, the first race back was going to be especially important. It was going to set the tone for the rest of the races for the rest of the season, and I feel like you can get yourself into either a really good mental headspace for the first race of the season or a slightly not so great bad one. And for those two drivers, you want to be the one that's got the advantage over your teammate after having that mental and physical reset over August. Now, for Oscar Piastri, if I thought he couldn't get any better, he managed to not only win the race, but get a Grand Slam over this race weekend. He had pole position, he led every lap, he won the race, and I do believe he also had the fastest lap. An absolutely perfect, clean weekend from Piastri. And there is nothing more I can add to that, because the fact that he got a Grand Slam, I feel says everything. Yeah, like what else do I say about him? He's still leading the championship. I don't really think he's concerned about anything on his side of the garage right now in terms of how the car is set up or his driving ability or anything like that. It's working like a well-oiled machine, which is what any driver wants, but especially when you're fighting for a championship. The other side of the McLaren garage, though, has not had it as easy, and it was a really difficult Sunday for Lando Norris. He ended up losing P2 at the start of the race to Max Verstappen, and I think it was just a bad start, right? Only dropped down into P3 though, and he did eventually overtake Max for P2 again. I will say that I don't think there was really a point that he was able to fully catch up to Oscar to try and get an overtake in. We had the safety car restarts, obviously, which I think did help, but Oscar seemed quite in control of this race. And you know what? P2 still isn't bad, even though he's going to want to finish ahead of his teammate. I think he would have been really happy with P2, especially compared to what happened, because in the last stages of the race, there was smoke coming out the back of his car. He was telling his race engineer he could smell something that was not good in the car, and he ended up DNFing with a mechanical failure, and I do believe it was because of an oil leak. An absolute nightmare for any driver at any point in the season, but when you are fighting your teammate for a championship, to DNF in the last handful of laps is beyond gutting. It's beyond words, and you could see how disappointed Lando Norris was, because this was through no fault of his own. There was nothing he could have done about this. Parts on cars sometimes fail or they get damaged. I don't know what happened. He did run over some debris earlier on in the race. I think it was his car anyway. Maybe that caused some damage to the car, and I'm sure they're going to be looking at his car. McLaren will be analysing what happened, looking at the car to understand what caused that oil leak and him to DNF. But yeah, I can't imagine what that felt like for him in that moment. A rough day for him just in racing, but a rough day for him in the championship as well. Because we went into this race, I think it was 8 or 9 points, the gap between him and Oscar Piastri in the championship. And look, on a perfect day, it would be Lando either overtaking Oscar in the championship, or at the very least, him closing that gap down. What we ended up getting is that gap extending to 34 points. That is a really large amount of points compared to, 8, 9 points. 34 is pretty big. It's more than just a race win. It's more than just a race win and a sprint win. Do I think this could have been a real big defining moment in the championship for Lando Norris? Yes, absolutely. I think it could have been. And I think we'll only really know in hindsight at the end of this season. But Lando now has registered 2 DNFs this season, and Oscar currently, I think, is the only driver that has scored points in every single race this season so far. And when you look at it like that, it's not looking too great for him. But 34 points, he would easily be able to overcome. I say easily, it still will be difficult. It would be more difficult than 8, 9 points would be to overcome, but it isn't impossible. And I think a lot of it is just going to come down to, one, the reliability of the car, obviously, and hopefully we don't see any more mechanical failures. But it's also going to come down to the sort of headspace that he has now for the rest of this season, and how quickly he can put this DNF behind him and not let this sort of gap now between him and Oscar that's gotten a lot bigger really get to him. And we know that Lando Norris can win races, and we've seen it multiple times this season, and that's really all he has to do. He can't concentrate on what's gone wrong in the past, and he can't focus on the actual mechanical parts of the car itself. That's not his job. His mechanics and engineers have to do their job, and he can only focus on driving well and being in the right headspace and trying to win the race. So we will see what happens next time out in Monza and over the rest of the season. But yes, there is a chance that this could have been a very large race-defining moment, but we will find out, and it will be in hindsight. Constructors' Championship and leaders there. I mean, McLaren I think Baku is the earliest they can win the championship, which is the race after next. We've got Monza and then a bit of a gap and then Baku. That is the earliest that they could win the constructors, and I would not be surprised that that will happen. Looking at P2 and P3, which is Ferrari and Mercedes, I mean, even though Ferrari have registered a double DNF this weekend, which we will talk about a little bit later on, they are still in second place in the championship. Mercedes are still in third, and Red Bull are still struggling in fourth place. However, out of the three teams I just mentioned, Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull are the only team that managed to have both drivers in the points, because Yuki Tsunoda did finally get back into the points in this race. He finished in P9, which was great to see for Yuki and probably a nice sigh of relief from him too. Let's chat about some of the midfield battles though, because I feel like the Dutch Grand Prix was an excellent race for the midfield. They really got to capitalise on the things going on around them. The drivers in teams that are higher up not having great races, they were able to really, really capitalise on it. And the first driver in the midfield that I absolutely have to talk about is, of course, Isaac Hadjar, who got his first podium in his rookie year. Now, Lando Norris's DNF definitely helped him to take that P3, but his qualifying meant that he was in position to take that P3, and his excellent driving, his brilliant driving throughout the entire race, because there were points that Charles Leclerc was on his tail trying to overtake him, but he defended so well and he made sure he didn't get in his head about it, and it made all the difference. Honestly, that P3 is my feel-good moment of the race. It was just amazing to watch. Another midfielder and also another rookie that I thought did amazingly well is Ollie Behrman, because Ollie did not have a great qualifying. He was out in Q1 and ended up starting from the pit lane. The team had made a lot of changes to his car that broke parc fermé, so he was starting from the pit lane. And from the pit lane, Oliver Behrman managed to make it up to P6, which is a career best finish for that young British driver. And it was really impressive work. And it meant that both Haas cars were in the points. And Haas, you know, more recently have not had a great run of races, so this is going to mean a lot to them, and it's also great for the Constructors' Championship. Alex Albon, who, you know, had a lot of words to say on the radio after qualifying about his tyres. He was not happy. Starting in P15, out-qualified by his teammate, he ended up finishing in P5, made up 10 places during that race. And in the opening lap of the race, he'd made up 5 of those places already. So he'd gotten up to P10 on the opening lap. And yeah, once again, for Williams and the Constructors, this is brilliant. But Alex Albon and Kimi Antonelli are now on 61 points each. So they are tied for points in the Drivers' Championship, which is amazing for Alex and Williams. Mercedes might not think so much, but Kimi is a rookie, to be fair. But yeah, just incredible driving from him as well. And we did get both Aston Martins in the points, so Lance Stroll did manage it. They put him on a bit of a different strategy with the hard tyres, and it worked for him, so great for Aston as well. Some of the chaos and the drama from this race, though, and I do have to start with Ferrari, because there is nowhere else for me to begin with when it comes to chaos and drama. Double DNF for the Scuderia straight after summer break, because this team does not want to give any of their fans any kind of peace, it seems. Lewis ended up crashing pretty early on in the race. It had started to rain, and I think what ended up happening is that he lost the rear of the car after going over a white painted line, which get really slippery in the rain. And he went into a wall, broke the front wing, and yeah, that was a DNF. He also, to add to the pain, guys, because it doesn't end, he also does have to serve a 5-place grid penalty next race, which is the Italian Grand Prix in Monza. Yep. He's got to serve that 5-place grid penalty for not slowing under double yellow flags during the reconnaissance laps, I think it was, so getting to the grid. There were double waved yellows, and the FA said he hadn't lifted enough and reduced speed enough. So, yep, that was Lewis Hamilton's weekend. And then right? You think, okay, we've got one Ferrari in the running though, and it's not looking too bad. He's like P6 and it could work out for us. At least we'll have one car scoring points. Anyone who thought that, and that's myself included, was a big fool because it did not happen. Charles Leclerc ended up crashing in the later stages of the race. Now, he had crashed and DNF'd not long after he'd made a pit stop. I think it might have been on his out lap. Kimi Antonelli was trying to get an overtake. He had a bit of understeer and crashed into Charles Leclerc. Now, it ended Charles Leclerc's race. He DNF'd. I don't think it was too far from where Lewis had DNF'd, actually. But yeah, his race was ended. Kimi Antonelli did manage to carry on. He did have damage, but he did get penalised for that contact. He got a 10-second time penalty, I believe penalty points on his licence, and all that on top of a 5-second time penalty he got for speeding in the pit lane. Zandvoort felt, right, just looking at all of this now, that if your driver was having a good day, it was a really good day. And if your driver was having a bad day, it was going to be absolutely awful. When it rains, it pours. But to be fair to Kimi Antonelli, he went over to Ferrari Hospitality after the race to apologise. Charles wasn't there at the time, but he did speak to Fred and apologise for the contact and said it really shouldn't have happened, which is really big of him to do as well, just to accept that fault, take it on the chin and be like, you know what, I wrecked someone else's race. But for Charles Leclerc, he just looked a little bit depressed after that race, sitting on that sand dune in the middle of the track on a phone. And I don't think it was his phone, guys. I don't think it was his, because I don't know where he would have gotten it from, but it seemed like he just had a photo shoot while he was on that sand dune. Whatever was going to make him feel a little bit better. The thing is though, right, I get it, looking at it right now, what positive do you take from this weekend for Ferrari? Because none of it looks great. I do get that. However, I do still think there are some positives we can pull from this. If we look really, really, really hard, you squint your eyes a little bit, there are positives. Because to be fair, both of the drivers were actually happy with the car this time. And that is something that we haven't really had from both the Ferrari drivers in a little while. But both Lewis and Charles said, yeah, pace was good. Charles in his post-race interview was saying, yeah, you know, it just felt a lot better. It felt good, and we were in a good place, and race pace felt good. And for Lewis Hamilton, who has been vocal about not really getting to grips with this car, said, no, we actually had a really good starting point. We had a really good direction to go in. I felt much happier. My side of the garage, everything was just working really well. And you could see that in the interviews he was doing throughout the weekend, is that, one, I think the break really helped, and he said himself, it really helped reset him mentally. But also, you could see him just talking about the car. It felt a lot more positive, and that he knew where to go, and that summer break and that reset really did help that. So I know that, yeah, a double DNF the weekend before Monza is not great, but I do think we could still take some positives from it. Right, what else went on? We had Carlos Sainz and Liam Lawson making contact, and after that brilliant qualifying, that did cause Carlos Sainz to fall quite far back in the pack, and him and Liam Lawson had to go and pit because their tyres were punctured after that incident. Carlos was dead set sure that this incident was down to Liam Lawson, so when he got the 10-second time penalty for causing a collision, he was in shock. And if you get a chance to listen to that radio, please do, because he really did not understand why he had this 10-second time penalty. They had to serve it though. There was no and ahhing over that. He did say he was going to speak to the stewards afterwards though, to clarify, figure out what's going on, and maybe plead his case, right? He ended up saying in his post-race interview in the media pen that the FIA didn't want him to go and talk to them, which I find really strange. And Carlos said himself, the FIA have always said, look, our door's open if you want to talk to us, if you want clarification, if there's anything, come to us. And I think that's the way a governing body really should work, is with that open door policy and, you know, being there for the drivers who you're there to help at the end of the day. So yeah, I think an open door policy is a good idea when you actually leave the door open. Because when you're saying to a driver, I'm sorry, I can't even understand this. When you're saying to a driver, we don't actually want to see you, sorry. Like, we know you might not be happy about this accident, but we're not going to see you. It's not the best. Now, obviously, we don't actually know the conversation that happened between Carlos Sainz and the FIA. And I do hope at some point Carlos can at least get some clarification as to why he had that penalty, because he genuinely doesn't quite understand why. But yeah, that's not great on the FIA right now. Obviously, we also had that DNF from Lando Norris that I mentioned, and just on-off rain throughout this race, which it was never heavy enough to go onto intermediate and wet tyres. Was heavy enough at some point to cause a crash with Lewis Hamilton, but yeah, it was a bit of a chaotic race. I can't lie. There was a lot of stuff going on and to keep an eye out on. Let's chat about our winners and losers before we finish this episode, though. And for my winners, it has to be the two rookies that are Isaac Hadjar and Ollie Behrman. They both did such a terrific good job. And for Isaac Hadjar, who's had a couple of races now where he hasn't scored points, and Liam Lawson's been getting to grips with the car a bit more, this was such a brilliant race for him, especially after summer break. And I think similarly for Ollie, where he's kind of been in no man's land a little bit and hasn't had the best season as a rookie so far. To get that P6 was incredible. So I'm super chuffed for them, and they are my winners of the weekend. And then for my losers, I don't think any of these are going to surprise you. Lando Norris, who has a bit of an uphill battle now as he fights for the championship. Ferrari, who, yes, I know I said there were positives, and there still are, but there is still, you know, a weekend where they walked away with no points for the second time this year, because the other weekend was in China, even though they did actually get points in the sprint there, to be fair. But they had a double disqualification in the Grand Prix and now a double DNF here. And I'm hoping and praying that there's some miracle in Monza for them. Final driver on that losers list, though, is Carlos Sainz, because after such a good qualifying, I was hoping that that would carry forward to the race. But yeah, that incident did not help anything. But that is the Dutch Grand Prix. My gosh, I didn't think coming back from summer break there was going to be this much going on, but here we are. Thank you guys so much for listening or watching if you're on YouTube, and diolch yn fawr. Make sure you follow me on TikTok and Instagram at stewards_office, and I will see you guys the next time you're summoned to the Stewards office.